This is Sudar Raja Gopalan, your podcast host for the series Beyond Sight, Beyond Limits. Today is the first episode, and viewers, we are very honored to have Rob Turner with us, who has served the software industry for the last 40 years and recently retired. Currently, he is serving as a second vice president for the California Council of Blind. Rob feels extremely fulfilled with the current role that he's serving at the council. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you.
So, Rob, I think that the viewers would be very much interested in knowing how you found out about your eye condition and when did it happen?
Well, I was what they call a retinopathy of prematurity baby, meaning I was premature, and in the early or in the 40s and 50s, unfortunately, they didn't realize that they were putting too much oxygen in the incubator. And so the excess oxygen caused damage to the optic nerve. And so there were a pretty large number of blind people from that era where this was what happened to them. So I have no recollection of seeing anything. I think theoretically I might have had a little bit of vision up till about 6 months old, or some very, very early time, and it just didn't work out. So I've been blind since birth, what they call congenitally blind. And so my eye condition. Now the question is, when does someone realize that they are different? You know, when does that begin to settle in? I don't know the answer to that question. We've talked about it, but I don't know. But anyway, I do have an experience that was kind of funny. I went to they were giving me a test of some kind at the doctor's, an eye test, and the doctor said, "Oh, you've got 1 inch light perception." I said, "Thanks, doc. Not gonna do me a lot of good." You know?
I know they talk about the ambulatory vision, right? So there's nothing useful. Yeah.
Not helpful.
Yeah, but it's. Can you walk us through what you had to do as part of your school education and how you navigated your school?
So it's interesting. At that time, I began through second grade. I was commuting to a school that was fairly close by. It was also a residential school for blind individuals throughout the province of British Columbia, Canada, where I was born. And so in the third grade, I chose to attend the school as a resident, and basically was at school during the week and then would come home. And it turned out that I found that to be very difficult. I think it would have been better if I would either have stayed there the whole year or just continued as a commuter student, because going back and forth between the family and the school I found was difficult emotionally. But we started off, of course, so it's basically a school for the blind at that point, whether it be residential or commute. And of course, that's where we began to get our basic skills. Now, we didn't have any kind of mobility training in those days.
Yeah.
It wasn't until recently, up until the last, 20 or 30 years, that they began to teach youngsters in early grades orientation and mobility, how to use a cane. And I can remember when riding on the school bus with my other blind students, we would debate about, are we going to use a cane? You know, oh no, I'm not going to use a cane. It's going to make me look different. And you know, of course, once you use the cane and you realize how useful it is, or a guide dog, I'm not, you know, then you realize, oh yeah, you don't mind it being you're different anyway, so just go ahead and use the cane, and it so much helps you get around so much better than without a cane.
Correct.
And so that's the one thing we once we started, it was like, okay, this is the way we're going to go, you know. And but of course, the basic skills included Braille. Now I have to say, for me, I was much more one of these kids that like to be outside and doing physical things, climbing poles, climbing trees.
Wow.
Doing things on a horizontal bar, just any kind of exercise. I was one of those kids. And so for me, Braille was, I did okay, you know, but I remember one day my parents, I was a Cub Scout, and we were, they had the meetings at the Braille Institute, and they said, come on into the library and let's take a look. My parents were really telling me in their own way, we really hope that you would begin trying to read more Braille and learn Braille. Well, I kind of did a little bit, but it really wasn't until I was in my late 30s, early 40s, that I had gotten a job at the lighthouse. And I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do this job, I've got to be better at Braille. And so I made it a point very consciously to read every day. And it was kind of fun because the lighthouse at that time, they had a lot of hard copy Braille books. And you didn't have to, they were just sitting on the shelf, and there was no librarian or anything, so I would just take books home and read them. And so I got better and better reading. And of course now with these refreshable Braille displays, you can carry thousands of books around with you. And I read Braille every day. I make it a point to read Braille every day, and I love it. I can read in my own voice. I can understand a little bit better about punctuation, spelling to some extent, although in this modern era, we really don't, the spell checker's going to take care of it for you. So,
yeah.
So, but that was my history with Braille. It just makes so much difference, and
yes.
I wish I would have started earlier.
Yeah, I also feel the same way, Rob. So when I lost vision in 2011, I had the opportunity to learn Braille, but I thought with so much assistive technologies, iPhone VoiceOver was my best friend. So I decided that I didn't need Braille until COVID hit, and I was in a classroom.
Oh.
And that's when I wanted to take notes very badly. My computer is saying something to me, and the lecturer is saying something to me, and I was like, oh my God, I can't manage this. I so wished that I learned Braille, but I'm glad that you're using it every day. And I know that there's a lot of debate about Braille education these days with assistive technologies, with all kinds of technologies that are around now. Students are thinking about whether they should really learn Braille or not.
Well, I would want to encourage every student, if you have trouble reading a computer screen and you have to rely on speech, I just really want to encourage students to learn, because it's a very freeing experience just to be able to read in your own voice. It's just such a wonderful skill.
Yeah, it must be feeling liberating, right?
It is very liberating.
And
it's just one of those things. And unfortunately, the technology isn't as cheap as I wish it could be. It's the refreshable Braille displays are coming down in price gradually. But you're still talking about maybe $1,400 for a 20-cell display, or for something like that. Maybe even more. And that's the problem. It's not easy for students to get these devices in their hands.
Yeah.
And,
I know. I think this is the problem of Braille education, right? I mean, the cost is so much up there.
It's very high, very expensive. Yeah.
And we want to bring it down as much as possible with the use of technologies.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious, Rob, now we have so many technologies, but at that time we didn't have technology, so you only had Braille books to read, or did you have anything else?
We did have Braille books to read,
Okay.
but that does bring up another interesting issue in terms of when I went to school. Of course, there was no computers, none of that stuff. I'm 74, so I go back pretty far. But I remember so vividly trying to write a term paper, and you know, you would probably do an outline in Braille or do some in Braille, so you'd have something to reference. But then you got to type it up. And the problem is when you're typing, you don't know what's on the paper. You don't know what you hope you've typed
Correctly.
or you know, there's a lot of stories that a lot of blind people talk about how they did their term paper, but they had the thing on stencil by mistake, you know, so that nothing showed up.
Oh.
You know.
Yeah.
So stuff like that.
You didn't have scribes?
No.
No? Okay.
No. No, that would have been a great idea. Yeah. I wish they would have thought of that.
In some parts of the world, that definitely they rely on scribes quite a bit.
I like that.
Yeah.
I wish I could have had that. But anyway, so that it did make it very difficult. And this is where the computer has been so liberating in terms of being able to edit, review, correct, you know, reorganize, just being able to do all that stuff. I just, you know, I wish I could have had that when I went to school, you know, but somehow we got through. That's the other thing.
Yes.
I was reviewing some of the cassettes that I kept from the late 70s and 80s. And I would do a lot with dictaphone, using a cassette machine as a dictaphone. And so I would make all my notes, and then of course from there I would type them out or do whatever I was going to do. Now, when I was a computer programmer, I did a lot of my outlines, my flow charts and so forth, using Braille cards. They had the IBM punch cards.
Yes.
And those were perfect for Braille.
Yeah.
And of course, the nice thing is you could shuffle them, you know, and so if you wanted to change the order of something, you could.
Yeah.
You know, and so that was a handy thing too, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, how, you know, during those days, I mean, we talk about accessibility now, and I get frustrated getting onto websites where I don't know whether I'm really going to be able to finish what I started.
Yeah.
But during those days, when you started your work, how accessible the whole place was, how aware people were that you needed something different.
So it's interesting because when I first started my computer programming job, I used a device called an Opticon. And that device you would move a camera across the page, and the print symbols would show up on what they called a tactile array. And so you'd move the camera across, and on your finger you'd be feeling the letters that are moving by, one character at a time.
Okay.
And so that was how I began, and of course that was very challenging. And people were accommodating. I don't know, you know, I tried to be as productive as possible, and I got pretty good performance reviews and so forth. But then they came along with the talking terminal, okay, and that enabled us to use the computer with speech. Now, keep in mind, this is before the graphical user interface. This is all command line based.
Yeah.
And in a way, that was an advantage for me because I was very capable of using these commands. Really learned. I was very. I just knew a lot of the commands, and I could use those to my advantage. And so, other than using Braille for notes, I didn't have any use for. There was no Braille in the job other than that. So the only thing would be my Braille notes. Now they did have a printer that they could produce Braille in a limited way, but that really wasn't necessary. but when I really wanted to learn Braille was when I got the job at the lighthouse. I just recognized that if I was going to be competent, I'd need to be able to be a good Braille reader.
Yeah.
And that got me going.
Yeah, that's, when I started using any of the assistive technologies, like JAWS, I mean, I needed somebody to come in and train me. And it was, like I was a software professional in my previous life. So I expected things to work a certain way, and I had efficiency bugs. So it was so frustrating for me that, things were not happening the way I was expecting them to.
Yeah.
But how did you overcome challenges like that? What was your anchor for when you were having difficulties in learning like that?
I was completely self-taught. I never really had any instruction. I learned it all on my own.
The computer programming?
Well, the computer programming, I took a class.
Okay.
But what I mean in terms of using the access technology, I never, I learned JAWS from the tutorials that they had, for example. But I never had any formal training.
Okay.
I became the trainer. I became the trainer in a sense.
Yeah.
That's a blessing. I'm glad I could do that.
Really, what really makes you continue despite so much difficulties?
I've thought about that from time to time, and I don't know the answer. I think it's just something we had to do. We just had to stay motivated. I mean, I wanted to earn a living. I wanted to have a family. I wanted to basically have a normal life, and so in order to do that, you really had to, sometimes you had to kind of struggle. And there were struggles at times as a computer programmer. I had one manager who, was not that easy to work with, but you just had to keep going and keep trying. The other thing I want to mention too is that I was very fortunate in that a lot of the people I worked with were really supportive. They really wanted to be helpful. And one of the fellows I worked with, who actually became our baseball coach, he helped me with a couple of things. There were some paperwork that had to be done, and he figured out a way to automate it so that I could do it on the computer. Little things like that made a big difference. I felt very accepted in my work there, and that's really, something I'm very happy about.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I don't think everybody is blessed like that, but it's really nice that people understood your needs and were able to help you out.
Yeah.
No, well.
There's so many stories where it didn't happen that way,
Yeah, you could motivate yourself to do better and go at it.
One of the things I remember too that I liked, I was always one, let's say that I'd caught up on my work assignments. Well, I would always figure out ways to do something else more efficiently. I would find I would have a procedure that I would work on. I'd say, okay, I can make this better. And that kind of kept me going a lot too, just that motivation to keep improving. And where some people might have read a talking book or done something unrelated to their job, I took it very seriously, and I always tried to focus on the job and doing things that would make me more productive. Yeah, I will say that.
Yeah, people always say that when one door closes, the other one opens.
Yeah, I like that.
I also like that, but I know that when the door opens also, there's a lot more struggle still one has to go through in order for you to become really efficient and proficient, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
But I think it feels like your attitude is the one that kind of carried you forward in your career.
I think it did. Yeah, I think it was just sort of knowing that you had to do it and you just get it done,
Yeah, and I was reading up your bio, and it's really nice that your daughter is an attorney now.
Yes, I'm very, very pleased with that. And it was a lot of fun having her, seeing her grow up and be successful. You know, I'm just really glad she's the same way. You know, she would. I remember when she was a little kid, or not a little kid, but when she was growing up, boy, she'd bring her textbooks, you know, over, and she'd have her textbooks, and she'd be doing her homework, and you know, she was motivated. She really was.
Yeah.
So,
It takes from you, I guess.
well, and her mother too.
Her mother
for sure.
too.
Yeah. Susan, my ex-wife, she's had a great career. She's been at AT&T for, gosh, well over 30 years, I'm sure. You know, and that takes some doing as well to have the same job all those years.
Yes. Yes, but can you recall a turning point in your life, or some aha moment?
Well, I think I think when I got that job at the lighthouse, that was a turning point for me to say, look, you got to learn Braille. You got to get to be more competent. And I thought back to my parents, you know, when we went to that library, and I remember them saying, this is something it's going to really pay off if you learn this. Now, I wish I would have heard them or acted on that earlier, you know, but parents, all they can do is try to guide, you know, that's all they can do. And so it took me, well, 20 more years before before I got into it, but
now you're into it and you're doing a good job with it. And
yes,
you're happy.
I'm feeling comfortable with the Braille. And the other turning point for me, and this is a little bit off topic, but I was a student going to community college, and I was working with the Department of Rehabilitation, and my counselor gave me, at that time we were using reel-to-reel tapes. The Recording for the Blind agency at that time, it's now called Learning Ally, they used to provide their information on 4-track tapes. Well, for whatever reason, my rehab counselor provided me with a tape recorder that only could handle 2-track tapes. And so at that time, I was just a very young person learning about the California Council of the Blind. And if I hadn't gotten involved with California Council, I would have been pretty meek. But they told me, the people in that chapter, they said, Rob, you have to tell them what you want. You have to be assertive, and you have to speak for yourself, because they're not going to. If you don't do it, they're not going to help. You know, so that gave me the knowledge to say, yes, I can be assertive. I can ask for what I need. You know, and sure enough, it worked. I told the rehab counselor the situation and explained all about it, and of course eventually got the kind of tape recorder I needed. You know, but that was just one example. That is one reason I've stayed involved with the council, because you know, I hope that we are teaching at this point now the younger generation to be advocates for themselves, to speak up for themselves, to recognize that you know, take control. And this is something that the council teaches. The other thing that the California Council for the Blind offers is it gives individuals who may otherwise not have a chance to take a leadership position, it gives individuals a chance to be leaders in their own way. And once you've learned to be a leader, even in that one organization, it helps you to generalize that to go and be with other organizations and take part. So it's a way to learn leadership skills on a smaller stage that you can then apply to a larger stage.
Yeah. And especially if you have to advocate for yourself, those skills, the leadership skills, would definitely come in handy.
They do.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, if you weren't fortunate enough to be exposed to that, you won't know
Yes.
that you have to be an advocate.
Yeah, and then the people whom you're with also, they may not know what you need. And
Exactly.
Because
That's so true.
Yeah, right. Because they have no awareness.
They don't know.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like, I don't know how it was for you. Now I'm seeing more and more. If I'm going with a sighted person to some place, if they have to interact with me, rather than interacting with me, they will interact with the sighted person. Did that happen to you?
Oh yeah. So many times. I got a big kick out of this. My longtime friend from elementary school, he played a trick. So he was with a sighted person. And as usual, the wait staff asked the sighted person, well, what does he want? Okay. So immediately he speaks in a different language, like in a fake language. So I just thought that was hilarious that it's like they had this dialogue back and forth.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So there's some uncomfortableness about, dealing with people with visual impairment.
There is, absolutely
right?
Correct.
So what can you tell the people who are sighted that, some misconceptions or myths that they have about visually impaired and blind?
Yeah, it's so difficult to, you're trying to change the world essentially, and it's very difficult to do. But again, that's where it comes to self-awareness. And so if I'm at a restaurant and the wait staff starts talking to my sighted friend, I'll just speak right up and say, "Oh no, I'll tell you what I want," and leave it at that. I don't try to make a big deal of it.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm not going to change the one thing I realize is you're not going to change the world. You're always going to come up against this.
Yes.
No matter, and that's okay. You just have to deal with it and make sure you take control.
Yeah.
But it happens all the time.
All the time, right? Yeah.
It really.
So if you have unlimited resources, including money, okay, and people, everything, computers, whatever, the AI power, whatever, and if you want to do one thing for the blind community, what would that be?
Wow, that's a tough question. In my case, since I'm so technology oriented, I'd want to say get every blind person a Braille display, give them training, whatever it takes to get them to be involved in their community, whether it be through using technology or, gosh, I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't have a good
that
answer.
Works. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What would be your piece of advice to the students, the visually impaired and blind ones?
Well, depending on where they are in their journey, again, I would really encourage them to learn Braille, to really learn the tools. That's what I wanted to say earlier. Yeah. It's learning how to use the tools. I think a lot of times people don't realize that if you learn the tools, it's going to make you so much more efficient. So I think a lot of screen reader users really don't understand all of the things that the screen reader can do for them.
Yeah.
And they don't know all the shortcuts. And I think that's a key. I think it's almost more important to do that than, well, I can't say that. I was going to say more, but really, if they realize how helpful it will be for them to master these things and to really get good at it, to just know everything off the top of your head. And that's more for a younger person. That's more for young people. I think I'm at the point now where I don't try to memorize everything like I used to, but I do try to have references available, quick ways to find out what I'm looking for. So I'll make a lot of notes about things that I can refer to quickly. But for the young people, I encourage them to master as much as possible and memorize whatever they can so that they can do things quickly.
Yes.
And efficiently.
And that gives them a lot of confidence.
Yes,
to face the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And confidence is very important.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm noticing myself, I'm comparing myself with somebody like you. I feel that when somebody has Braille as the foundation, definitely their confidence level is different.
I believe that's true. And there are studies that show that individuals who've learned Braille do find employment more easily.
Yes.
Than those who don't have that skill. But that doesn't mean a person can't be employed and do very well. My wife doesn't know Braille.
Yeah.
But she's done very well.
Yes, I've had the opportunity to work with Alice. Yeah, she's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So we're almost wrapping our conversation here, Rob. Thank you for being our first guest.
My pleasure, yeah.
And one thing that I remember reading in your bio, that you believe that visual impairment is a characteristic of a person, and that doesn't define who you are.
That's exactly right.
Can you tell a little bit more about it?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that you're a whole human being, and okay, yes, you're limited in your vision, but that doesn't mean that you can't participate in society in a very meaningful way, and that that it's not going to restrict you from having a family, from having a job, from helping other people. There's so many things that a blind person can do to participate in their community. Now, that doesn't mean that blindness is not important, because I'm going to say blindness is a limitation. It's not. There are things that we just don't do as easily as a sighted person, and I think I've learned that more as I've gotten older. But again, I wouldn't want blindness to be a limitation, and in other words, I want to overcome whatever limitations there are, and I'm going to do my best to do that. And so.
And in your life so far, you have overcome that, Rob, and you've been able to have, quote unquote, a normal life. And you've got a daughter who is an attorney, and you've had a great career, and now you're about to give all your time and effort away to California Council of Blind or Silicon Valley Council of Blind. You're definitely contributing to the community and making a difference in the community.
Well, thanks, Sudar.
Yeah, so I really feel blessed to have interacted with you and known about you, and I think you're a great role model for the upcoming generation.
That's what we're hoping for. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Rob.
My pleasure.
To the viewers, if you liked what you heard today, what you saw today, please like us and share this podcast widely with all your friends. It is true that being blind or visually impaired is a visible disability, but every one of us has something that we are not good at, or we have disability in doing that. So it is how somebody navigates that makes a big difference. So friends, please share widely, and if you would like to be a part of this community, you can go to the web with www.accessbraille.org and support us in many different ways, and see you for the next podcast in a couple of weeks.